mom in a big bed in the middle of the room, my dad in a little bed in the corner of the room, and he had the sheets wrapped around him like a burrito. And to me, that was normal. Whatever happens to you when you're little, you think is normal. I remember going to a friend's house for my first sleepover, and my friend Ruben is giving me a tour of his house. And then we get to his parents' bedroom, and I am in shock to see one bed. So I asked my friend, Ruben, where does dad sleep? And I was told that the Flintstones arrangement that my parents had was not normal. I didn't really know why. I remember asking my mom that week, and she said about my dad and my mom sleeping in separate beds, you know what, Mijo, your dad is a violent sleeper. And the first night that we spent together in the same bed, in sleep, he punched and kicked me out of bed. And I said, Negro, no puede ser. We got to get you a different bed. But the reason behind it was that my dad, many, many years before, when he was 19 years old, in 1951, he, as a member of the U.S. Army, went to fight for this country in the Korean War. And the things that he saw, the horrors that he experienced, traumatized him. He was a member of the Borinqueneers, the 65th Infantry, at the time, a segregated unit, because Puerto Rican soldiers were not allowed to fight alongside white soldiers back in those days. My father saw his best friend die in his arms. So naturally, he was traumatized. And every night of his life, he relived those horrors. So that's why he had those nightmares. And when people exhibit weird behavior, there's often a reason for it, and we need to embrace our empathy to understand and appreciate why people act in a certain way. The third bubble, the bubble of language. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and my first language is Espanol. And that's the first language of people who were born in Puerto Rico. But I went to a school where all my instruction was in English. So I spoke Spanish at home, English at school, and Spanglish everywhere else. And when I went to the University of Puerto Rico for my bachelor's, and I spoke my Spanglish, some English to my classmates, they made fun of me. They said, pero mira esta, se cree que es gringo hablando inglés así. They thought I was uppity, that I thought I was an American. And that offended me. And I thought quite foolishly, you know what? If people don't appreciate me speaking another language here in Puerto Rico, surely in Pennsylvania they will. And of course, as you might already know, if you were caught speaking Spanish while brown in Pennsylvania, you could run into someone who hates you already without knowing you, and who will say something to the effect of, go back to your country. And if any one of you is told that, here's what you do. I'm back, because this is my country too. You see? And they might spread their hate and have a sign that says, this is our country, speak English. And you know what? They may very well misspell the word our. Because one thing that I've learned is that a good racist can hate much better than he can spell. But you know what? We will all encounter that when we are in the minority. And it happened to me and a good friend of mine, both of us professors, both of us were speaking Spanish in a restaurant. And well, I'm going to read a poem that demonstrates what happened and what I should have said. And I didn't say, because at the time I was so shocked and offended that I couldn't act. So I channeled my anger into art, and I wrote this poem, and I'd like to dedicate it to anyone who has served in the military. This is Denied Service. Upon being heard speak Spanish at the entrance of a restaurant in Hazleton, PA. Should I have told the waitress that my father never had a good night's sleep, that he was haunted by recurrent nightmares after that day when he, a young man with stripes on his shoulders, led Private Diaz and Private Gonzalez to the safety of the trenches, and rescued Corporal Murphy, Private Williams, and Private First Class De Leon from the hovering claws of tanks and gunfire before he tried and failed to save Private Rivera. 20-year-old Carlos Rivera, Carlitos, beloved father of newborn Maria Rivera, to whom he promised to return safely from Korea. My father, deafened by the shots, the shrieks of torture, the agony of oscillating bullets, dragged Carlitos' body through smoke and ashes. Saw the blood run in rivulets over the mud. The tourniquet was not enough to stop the flow. And as Carlitos bled to death, my father said, hold on, my friend, aguanta, que pronto salimos de esto. But they would not get out in time for life. And for Carlitos, who whispered mi Maria as his last breath, that would be it. This cross my father carried with him every day. Should I have told the waitress that my uncle lost both legs in Vietnam, and that the phantom pain, no morphine could erase, the throbbing of the stumps, the constant pounding, sharp like a tornado, relentless like the memory of war, would follow him throughout the bitter journey from opium to Prozac. And a decade after his return to the island, he still assured my mother that the American Military Academy was the best choice for me to learn the discipline of service. Should I have told the waitress that both my father and my uncle, who worked for the federal government, died in the same veterans hospital in Guaynabo, the same year my cousin enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps? Should I have told the waitress that after years with the junior ROTC insignia on my sleeve and a bilingual education on the island that Spain forgot, I now teach English to native English speakers in North America, the English that I learned in the Caribbean, specifically the U.S. Commonwealth. Yes, a Commonwealth like the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, where I was born and raised. Should I have told the waitress that having this skin that white people pay good money for at the tanning salon is not a crime? That saying salud instead of bless you when someone sneezes is not a crime? That greeting friends with a kiss instead of a handshake is not a crime? That teaching Spanish to my son, who calls the mainland home, is not a crime? That I cannot remove the plátano stain on his back, nor would I want to, because he is the grandson of Sergeant Avila, who sacrificed his health for us, who didn't let Carlitos die in vain, who taught me well the value of silence and of words, who knew since he was the same age as this woman who has already judged me, that there are things in this world that cannot be denied. Soy ciudadano de los Estados Unidos y soy puertorriqueño. Should I have told the waitress anything when she called me a foreigner? Thank you. Thank you to everyone who listened. And let me tell you, Jade was kind enough to send me a package filled with water from the Little Honey Creek in Indiana. So this is a genuine, authentic water from the Little Honey Creek. I'm gonna have a taste and see what it's all about. I think you are not advertising this properly. This is not sweet at all in Indiana, but it is a water with mineral content. So un saludo antes de seguir a mi amiga y colega Evelyn, que está ahí, a Jenny, mi ex estudiante. Yes, and thank you everyone who is here. So, I was not always a minority. I lived in Puerto Rico for 31 years, so I was amongst Puerto Ricans. So I was just, you know, just one more. I didn't know what it was like to be a minority until I moved to Pennsylvania. And one of the burdens of becoming a minority is that you constantly have to prove to the majority that you are not the stereotype that they have of you. And that can be exhausting. Sometimes you just want to take off the mask and be invisible in a positive way, but you can't, because perhaps that day you smell like sofrito and people can tell, right? And there are signs that give it away that you are indeed Latino. And the first sign is your name. If your name is Hermenegildo González, ahí está, Latino, marcado. You're marked. It's inconfundible, as we say, back in the motherland, right? If you are a woman from Puerto Rico and you move from the island to the mainland, the trouble with your name begins. Because in Puerto Rico, women don't take their husband's last names because they don't love them. It has nothing to do with that. It is cultural. And actually, if you and your husband have the same last name, you may have married a blood relative. So my wife and I don't have the same last name. And people who know us know that. When I won a big literary award, I was invited to a fancy party by a company of people who had money. And they know that my wife and I don't have the same last name. However, the invitation came in the mail and it read, Dr. and Mrs. Javier Avila. And you see, we all know that means that they invited me and my wife. But for a Puerto Rican, that could mean at least three things. Number one, that I am both Dr. and Mrs. Javier Avila. But that is not the case. Number two, that I got so lucky in life that I met and married a woman with exactly my first and last name. Mira mi esposa aquí, Javier Avila. Mira que linda mi esposita, mírala, right? Not the case either. Number three, the common assumption that upon marriage, her last name vanished. And you know what? Why not encapsulate everything about her in my first and last name and just erase her whole name altogether? So you know what my wife said? She said, I'm not going. I'm like, honey, are you sure? They have great filet mignon, and I heard they're famous for their mashed potatoes. And she said, yeah, you enjoy the potatoes, enjoy the filet. I know you have to go, but I'm not going. But here, take the invite. So I take the invitation, I put it in my back pocket, and I go there ready to cause trouble. And at the table, I shake hands with the president of the company who says, Javier, so great to see you. Where's your wife? And I say, unfortunately, she was not invited. He said, no, nonsense. I wrote the invitation myself. And that's when I showed him the invite. And I said, do you see her name here? It was an awkward, uncomfortable moment for him, not for me. I was having the filet. I was enjoying the potatoes. They were great. They were not lumpy at all. Beautiful. And you know what? When you take a stand so that people respect who you are, where you come from, your culture and your heritage, you're going to sometimes be unpopular. And people are going to perhaps not like it. But you know what? You take a stand for what's right, because if they don't respect that, you don't need them in your life. And once they do, then they can appreciate you. So moving on. Another sign that gives it away that you are Latino is your physical appearance, right? Now I have a tan that does not go away in the winter. And I didn't have this issue in Puerto Rico. So when my wife and I bought our house in Pennsylvania in 2006, we had pride of ownership. We were so happy. And I remember when we saw the house and the rose bushes were overgrown, my father-in-law said, hey, Javier, I have a perfect pair of shears. I'm going to give them to you. So you're going to cut those rose bushes. It's going to feel like butter. It's going to be great. I'm like, all right. I got so excited that very day I went to Home Depot. I got a pair of gloves and I started working on the garden. Very happy. And I see my neighbor from across the street. He parks his really nice Audi, gets out of the car, golf hat, golf shirt, walks over to me, and I am excited. Why? Because growing up in Puerto Rico, I learned that when you move into a new neighborhood in the U.S., your neighbors get you apple pie. So I was like, when I see this guy coming, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to get apple pie. Pie de manzana, he's coming. right? I remove my gloves and we shake hands. And I say, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Javier. And he says, what a coincidence. My guy's name was Jose, but he had to go back to Mexico. Listen, Javier, when you're done with this house, could you come over to my house and give me an estimate? Now, don't feel bad. Those of you who might feel bad for me. Remember, I thought I was Patrick Swayze. And I'm also a clown. So I played along with it. And I said, okay, your name's Robert, right? As soon as I'm done with this house, don't worry, I'll get you the estimate. I finish my job. I go in and I print out an estimate for him. I even write Avila Lawn Services. And I wrote $500 an hour. I knock on his door and I give him the estimate. Here, Robert, here it is. He looks at it and this is what he said, literally. Javier, I don't know if in Puerto Rico they know about decimal points, but this should be $5 an hour, not 500. And that's when I told him that I was the owner of the house. And he felt ashamed, he felt embarrassed, and he said, and I quote, Javier, I don't want you to think that I'm a racist. And I said, no, actually, I thought you were going to get me apple pie. For whatever reason, maybe because of the awkwardness of the moment, we did not speak for 9 years. Sometimes I would see him and I would go, hey, but he would just turn around and go in. So I'm like, all right, that's the way it is. But then something magical happened. I won the Pennsylvania Professor of the Year Award. Big deal. And my college posted billboards of me and my face all over the highways of Pennsylvania. And my neighbor, of course, saw it. So he came knocking on my door 9 years later. I opened the door and I say, Robert, what a surprise. It's been a long time. He shakes my hand. He said, let me shake your hand, Javier. I did not know I was living across from a celebrity. Said, I'm not really a celebrity. I'm an educator, and this is something the college is doing to highlight the accomplishment. But how great that it took this accomplishment for me to be worthy of shaking your hand. And perhaps now would be a good time to ask you, can you get me that apple pie? And then I added, and if you do, can you add a little Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream? Because I really like that. And you don't know, I don't know, but he didn't like it apparently, and we haven't spoken in 4 years. So I'm still waiting for that apple pie. Damn. You know what? Okay, so we covered name, we covered skin tone, and now it's time to cover something that you don't see, but you can hear quickly, and it is the accent, right? If you learn another language after the ideal language acquisition age, you could learn it, but you're gonna learn it with an accent. There's nothing you can do about it. There's a lot of factors involved, such as muscle memory, tongue placement, and the arsenal of one language missing some elements from the other. So, for example, the letter T in English, to utter that sound, you have to put the tip of your tongue on the roof of your mouth and you have to spit a little t, time, right? And in Spanish, to utter the T, you have to put the tip of your tongue behind your front teeth. Ta, 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 ta. You don't spit that much. Tiempo. So if you say it with using the other sound in the arsenal, if you say tiempo, you have an accent. If you say time, you have an accent. And if you say, Vieques, estoy contigo, you're Ricky Martin. And we forgive Ricky for his American accent because we love him. If you don't know the complexities of language learning and the intricacies of linguistics, you might make a completely foolish error and no one's gonna find out unless there's a Latino in the room who will tell you. I had a professor in grad school, let's call him Professor Murphy, because that was his name, who was teaching us a book that had a novel that had words in Spanish. And every time he came across a word he didn't know, he would ask me, the token Latino. Say, oh, Javier, we came to this crossroads of vida. What does this mean in this context? Vida. And I see he means vida, and vida means life. And I say, it's life. Yeah, but in this context, I'm like, in the context that she's saying life. So one day we get to a part, a really crucial scene in the book where the main character has reached the Mexican border. And Professor Murphy goes, and this is the part where our hero runs into the Jovanes. Javier! I'm like, yes, yes. Who are these Jovanes? Is this a Mexican gang? Are they going to hurt her? I see the page and the word, and it says jóvenes. I'm like, Professor Murphy, it's jóvenes, not Jovanes. It means young people. He says, are you sure? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. Spanish is my first language. It means young people. These are kids that she ran into. And that's when it hit me that when you are in the minority, you will be questioned. You will be required to produce some kind of documentation, proof that you belong there. You'll be doubted. If you reach a position of power, they might ask you for a birth certificate. And that's a realization that I didn't want to reach, but hey, it happens. But speaking of accents, let's talk about another kind of accent. The acento diacrítico, tilde, el palito, whatever you want to call that stick that hovers over vowels to indicate emphasis on a syllable. That acento, that accent mark, disappears in most cases when you move to the United States. It's not in your diploma, not in your legal documents, nowhere. It's gone. But I like to honor my Hispanic students, and I like to say their names right, and I like to embrace their heritage so that they know. So whenever I have a student whose name is in Spanish, I like to say it the way it's meant to be said. I remember this student that I had a few years ago, and his name was David Perez. And I'm going over the list. I'm like, all right, when he comes to my class, David Perez will feel so good. And the day comes, and there is that David Perez in the back. He's got a little thin beard, New York Yankees hat on, and he's talking to people. Very happy guy. And I go, oh my God, wait till I say it, man. He's going to feel like he's at home. So I say, David Perez. He goes, oh, yo, prof. It's Dave Perez. I'm like, what? Dave Perez, what are you talking about? You're David Perez. No. I don't speak no Spanish. Like, apparently you don't speak any English either. But listen, he demanded it. And of course, I had to accept, and I called him Dave Perez. Pero la pinta de boricua no se la quita nadie. You see, he will always have the same issues that any person who looks like that will have in the U.S. And I remember going home that night and feeling a little sad about what had happened. Not because so much of the name, but his attitude. I told my wife, hey, hon, you know what? This kid in my class, he seems to be ashamed of his Puerto Rican heritage. This guy was New Yorican. He had two Puerto Rican parents, and he was born in New York. And my wife said, well, you said he was ashamed of his heritage and maybe his name. Yeah, his name too. He's like, yeah, well, you know, you're going to be his role model now, and you can help him with that. And if I recall correctly, didn't you hate your name growing up? And I'm like, yeah, you have a point. Growing up in Puerto Rico, I did not like the name Javier because Javier is a very common name. It's kind of like John in the US. And I was an artistic, creative kid, and I wanted an exotic name, a different name. Like a friend of mine from Puerto Rico, Sean. Now, some of you are laughing, thinking, what are you talking about? But Sean in Puerto Rico, S-E-A-N, is an exotic name. No one else is called that. And his last name was Roberts. Can you imagine? We could not really say Sean Roberts, so we said John Robin. And any time he came over to a party, to someone's house, John Robin viene pa' acá, John Robin viene pa' acá, John Robin. I wanted to be like John Robin, but I was Javier Avila. There were 4 Javieres in my class. And I actually would have liked to have been Javi, but there was already a Javi, so I couldn't be Javi. But you know what? I got my wish many years later When I moved to Pennsylvania, I became exotic. And at first it was cute when people said, oh, that J sounds like an H. Oh, it's Javier. I'm like, mm-hmm. It was cute the first 200 times. And then I realized, oh my God, no one, unless they're Spanish speakers, no one's gonna say my name right. Once again, I channeled the energy into art, and I created this that I will share with you. And I'd like to dedicate this to anyone who has a difficult name, anyone who goes to Starbucks in the US and thinks about perhaps you will create a Starbucks name so that you don't have any issues. So maybe that name should be Ruby. You like that name? Yeah. Ruby, yes. So this is for all of you, the trouble with my name. All my life, I had been mispronouncing my name, which I thought was Javier Avila, until I moved to Pennsylvania to learn linguistics outside the classroom. First came the tennis club experience. Hi, may I help you? The nice lady asked. Yes, I have a court reserved for 2 p.m., I replied. Under what name? Avila. You must mean Avila. Yes, that's what I meant. And I thought, how nice of her to teach me the proper pronunciation of my name. It baffled me, though, because my publisher has called me Avila for 7 years. My student who wrote Avila on his first paper seemed surprised when I suggested that he look at the syllabus to read the proper spelling of my name. And when he handed in his second paper and said, I got the name right this time, and I saw that he had written Avila again, I told him that we never stop learning. And he grinned as though he had never heard sarcasm before. The police officer who pulled me over for having tinted windows said, I'm going to let this slide because they're not so dark, Mr. Avilar. And when I corrected him, he said, that might be the way Spanish people say it, but this is America. And who am I to tell him that I am not Spanish, or that America consists of dozens of countries, and in most of them, se habla español. The principal at my son's school prides herself in saying the students' names correctly. Therefore, when she said, Mr. Avila, we'd be honored if you could come and read poetry to the children, I naturally accepted, in part because she didn't call me Mr. Avila like the parent who recommended me did. You see, I like that they have options, that they can be creative, that they will bravely forego looking it up or asking the person who's had the name for 40 years or so. But the real trouble, as it turns out, is my first name. Waiting for my license, the DMV lady yelled, Javier! And I had to look around to realize she meant me. When I was hired to teach a writing workshop, my future colleague shook my head and said, welcome to the department, Javier. And it made me feel so nice and French. At a conference, a fellow writer introduced me to his friends as the Puerto Rican poet laureate, Javier. And to hear the first syllable stressed so dactylically transported me to a Longfellow masterpiece. The first time my chiropractor called me Javier, I went through an ethnic crisis. But that was resolved when 10 minutes later, the massage therapist said, let's see how much stress you've been holding on to, Javier. And of course, I felt something was fishy when the MC at a poetry festival introduced me as Dr. Caviar. Getting takeout is an issue. When they ask, what's the name? I panic. What should be my takeout alter ego? Even Siri gets confused with me, and we have an intimate relationship. I mean, why go to the gym every day if she insists on calling me Javier? You see, when my friends moved to the States, they became other people instantly without alternate pronunciations. Ivan Vélez became Ivan Velez. Joel Ramos became Joel Ramos. And Brenda Aguirre became Brenda Aguirre. I, on the other hand, became many people every day, and I still do. There seems to be no cure for my multiple name pronunciation disorder, but there is a prescription that can heal it. one that must be renewed daily by phone. So every day I dial the number, the only one I'll always know by heart. And as soon as she answers the phone, I hear my name the way it's supposed to sound, in the voice of my mother. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have more of this Little Honey Creek water. It's actually, it's an acquired taste. Once you get used to the human remains that inevitably I can taste here. It tastes kind of like the water from rivers in New York. Oh, okay. Very good. My mom, who is about to be 85 years old, lives in Puerto Rico. She would joke about that one of her great accomplishments in life was to be able to make the rice and beans exactly like her mother-in-law, my grandmother, Veneranda Rivera. I'm going to show you a picture of my grandmother when she was young. This is my abuelita. There she was, a young woman. My grandmother lived 100 years, an entire century. She saw the entire 20th century. And she was a fascinating, strong woman. She was little. She was only 4'11", about 85 pounds, but she was larger than life. And when she smiled, she lit up the room. But when she smiled, you noticed that she was missing her 4 front teeth. She had fangs, but with those fangs, she could get a chicken and she would just destroy it. She would suck out the marrow and leave virtually no evidence that a chicken was ever there. My grandmother would go to the casinos in San Juan. She would go with her purse and line it with aluminum foil. And inside, no Tupperware, inside she would just put pizza, steak, shrimp, and even rice right in there. And then throughout the week, she would say, yeah, comete la pizza, que buena. Pizza, it has rice on top and a little shrimp. It's good. When she was frail and quite old, she told me, Javier, one day, I want to tell you the true story of my life because there's things that you don't know that would shock you. I was too young and arrogant to understand that she was giving me a gift. So I made a joke. And I said, what, did you get a parking ticket one day, Grandma? Like, what could she possibly tell me, right? It was not until many years later, after she died, that I became curious. Thankfully, I could ask my mom. And I said, Mami, ¿cuál era el secreto de abuela? What was her secret? What did she do? And my mom said, oh, if you really want to know, sit down, okay? Because it's going to be a while. And she told me the entire story of how my grandmother was illegally targeted and followed by the FBI for 12 years. My grandmother was best friends with Don Pedro Albizu Campos, the head of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. My grandma would cook for him, and she was his neighbor. And the FBI at the time it was the times of El Carpeteo. So they followed these Puerto Rican nationalists who believed in the independence of Puerto Rico. And my grandmother has a file this big that you can find in El Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, and they're available for the public to see. And in it, she is described as a threat to the US government, my abuelita. Ironically, and she actually was punished for waving the Puerto Rican flag. At the time, there was a gag law that prohibited anyone from displaying the Puerto Rican flag, which is why if you see anyone in the US with a Puerto Rican flag hanging from the rearview mirror or a license plate with the flag, listen, this is an act of pride and rebellion, something that is truly, truly an embracing of the culture. So ironically, this was happening while her 3 sons, my 2 uncles and my dad, were fighting for this country in the Korean War, and they came back, all 3, damaged. We did not talk about these issues in the household. I think we had an understanding that love knows no political boundaries. And I really could not have imagined my grandmother doing that, because to me, she was my little abuelita, little abuela, who had great wisdom to impart on all the generations. And she had remedies that she highly recommended that today I would like to share with the good people of Indiana State University, especially the Joe Venice at Indiana State. These are remedies, products that even though they're made in the US, they are Latino products. And you know what I'm talking about. The first one I'm going to share is this one. People, you know what I'm talking about here. Now, you might think that this is pronounced Vicks VapoRub, but no, no. Esto es Vicks Vaporub, okay? Vicks Vaporub. Let me see if you can smell it over there. Vicks VapoRub is good for muscle aches, but also for a cold, for the flu. And here's what you do. You put a little bit of Vicks behind your ears. You put a little bit of Vicks on your chest, on your throat area. You put it on the soles of your feet, and you put socks on. Te lo pones por donde quiera, menos ahí no, porque ahí pica, but put it everywhere else. Put the Vicks on, and it will solve your issues. It's also good for acne, okay? Another product that I highly recommend is this one. Here we go. This is Agua Maravilla. Okay, maravilla means marvelous or magic. And this is indeed water from the heavens above. Agua Maravilla, witch hazel, is good for after shaving, cuts, scrapes, muscle aches, and it's incredibly effective for acne. If you have a pimple, and now I know that you are Jovenis and you are in the pimple stage of your life. I started my pimple stage at age 14, and it's never gone away. You still get it, right? Here's what you do. You pop your zit. Boop. Then you put a little bit of this witch hazel on a cotton pad, and you put it on consistently for a day. The next day, it's gone with Humphreys. But it's got to be this one, okay? With the lady, con la doñita, it's got to be this one. Don't get the Dickinson one because the pimple will perhaps last 2 days. And if you get the Walmart brand, you're going to get 2 pimples, so don't even try that. Here is a product that my grandmother used every day. She would just put it all over her skin. This is Alcoholado Bay Rum. See that great color? Let me take a sniff of this. Woo! It's strong. Listen, this is good for any skin rash. This is good, actually, if you're feeling a little hot. I have very hot lights on me right now. But you put a little bit of this on the back of your neck, and it's like you just got air conditioning, okay? My grandmother would even drink this. I don't know if I recommend for you to drink it. It is 70% alcohol, but she did live to be 100, so who knows? Finally, a product that I think everyone should be aware of is this. Manteca de Ubre La Vaquita, or any other brand. This is udder butter. They give it to cows when they're feeding their young. This is like Bengay or Tiger Balm. It smells like root beer. That's what my son tells me. And one of the issues, though, it's highly recommended for arthritis. So if you have arthritis, this is good for you. However, esto no abre, this doesn't open. So if you have arthritis, get yourself a friend who does not have arthritis so that he can help open this. But aside from all these products, when I think of my grandmother, when I think of my culture, I realize that we carry our cultures in our belly. And it's the food. It's always the food. I travel all over the country, and everywhere I go to do the show, I try to find the Latino restaurant, the Caribbean restaurant, or wherever it is. I go in there, I smell the spices, I smell the sofrito, I smell the rice and beans, and I feel that I have time traveled to my abuelita's house when she's cooking for us, and she was an incredible cook. So I would like to share this poem with you. This is dedicated to my grandmother, and it's a tribute to Puerto Rican cooking. And I'd like to dedicate it to all the grandmothers and everyone who's thinking of your grandmother or your mother who was the best cook in the house. This one's for you. En casa de abuela. Doña Bene, the best cook in San Juan, did not own any measuring cups. Her kitchen was too small to fit 2 people. And when she seasoned the food, it appeared as though she threw spice after spice, leaves and sofrito randomly into the old pots and pans. Her freezer housed the snow that afflicts old appliances. On the countertops, a glass jar with reused oil beside a clogged strainer would terrify anyone interested in longevity. And there she was, 90 years old, dark, minuscule, and hunched, in her lavender sleeping gown, flattening plantains, mixing reca with red bell peppers, flashing a nearly toothless smile that would look like a vagrant's if she were on the street. And then she would serve us on the cobalt blue plates, steamy white rice, red beans, chicken fricassé, tostones, a slice of avocado from the tree that she planted in her youth. And she reminded us that there was flan de coco for dessert. Eat everything, she said, as she walked to the living room to sit on her red armchair and rub witch hazel on her legs. We devoured the meal. We always did, knowing once again that despite what anyone would say, we were never poor. Thank you. The reason people in this household are clapping, and I'm hoping you there, is because we all got hungry. Now, I have just been informed by Indiana State University that they will provide rice and beans and tostones and fricassé de pollo to everyone attending this presentation. Yes, that's what Jade has informed me. Yes, so you can request your voucher soon. And it will be accompanied by a little sip of a little Honey Creek water, which is the best water in Indiana by far. I am convinced now. It's given me strength. I grew five inches now from the water only, so I have to kind of deal with this. All right, so what I do, and I use this metaphor, what I do, what I've done over 170 times in the last 4 years doing this presentation, which changes every year changes a little bit, but is Polina, sí, flan de coco también, and it will be prepared by a genuine Puerto Rican abuelita, okay? Una boricua abuelita bien buena. So, what I do is I'm building a cathedral of equity. Now, what do I mean by that? The great cathedrals of our times took generations to build. If you started working on it, you most likely did not live to see the finished product. But that doesn't mean you're not going to work on it with all your might and all your heart, because you know you're working on something larger than yourself. So to build a cathedral, it takes patience, it takes time. You build it brick by brick, and you do it not just for you, but for the children of your children. So that is why I'm doing it. And before I get to the last segment of this presentation, I would like to thank everyone at Indiana State who made this happen. This is never an easy thing to do. So thank you to the entire team and to the champions of equity who are making this happen. And now, on to my last story. When my son was 3 years old, his great-grandmother died, and I thought it would be good to write about her, and not just her, but to write about her 4 great-grandmothers, because they were such different women who had origins that represent the diversity of the United States of America. And my son has it all in him: West African, Caribbean, Spanish, Polish, Irish, Jewish, etc. There's such richness in him. And I think that is precisely what makes this country as great as it is, that we have all this diversity. So I wrote that poem, and it was a long poem, but then I was inspired to write even more when something happened. When he was 6 years old, my son asked to borrow my Puerto Rican flag, the one that I take to every show that I do all over the country when I do it in person. And it was for an oral presentation that he was giving on himself and who he is. And I'm like, all right, have it. I see him practicing in his room. He wraps the Puerto Rican flag around his shoulders and he says, "Hello, my name is Oscar Avila. I am from Pennsylvania and I am Puerto Rican." And you see, to him, that was just a normal thing to say. But to me, that was important. That was significant. And it was meaningful because it not only shows that he has such a positive representation of Puerto Rico and of Puerto Ricans, thanks to what we've done in his education, but also that you can do both, that you could love this country, but you can also love Puerto Rico, that you can be a proud American and a proud Puerto Rican. You could be a proud American and a proud Haitian, proud American, a proud Italian. You can do that. And it's a tragedy when a culture gets destroyed by assimilation in hopes of equality, when you should retain your culture, your language, and add to it. Be multilingual, be multicultural, and that is truly American. So that's my final thought before I read this poem that I'd like to dedicate to my son and to everyone who is watching from Puerto Rico, especially. This one is for you, Bloodline. Abuela Bene, the daughter of a former slave and her owner, married a Spaniard who became a Puerto Rican nationalist. And together, amid the dangers of Albisu's battles, they had 3 sons, the youngest of which, Alfonso, treasured me the way I treasure you. You carry the heart of West Africa, the might of Spain, the dream of independence in your veins. Abuela Juana, whose parents can be traced back to the natives who greeted Columbus, married Gracia, a blue-eyed campesino. And of their 11 children, my mother, Josefina, the first to attend college, would sweat through a 2-hour commute on 3 buses in the sweltering heat of the tropics to become a teacher. The nobility of the Taíno and the grit of the Jíbaro shine in you. Great-Grandma Bernadine, daughter of Austro-Hungarian immigrants who severed their Slavic roots amid the turmoil of war, lost her husband as a young mother and raised her 3 children by herself. Her oldest, Nancy, who cultivated kindness from the hardship of scarcity, gave birth to your mother. The resilience of the Slovak, who survived against the odds, against the elements, propels you. Great-Grandma Genevieve, Irish, life of the party. And your Polish-American great-grandfather, a mailman like my father, taught Grandpa Joe, the oldest of 7, the meaning of honest work. And within you, the unyielding spirit of Ireland and the fortitude of Poland coexist. A convergence of countries has shaped your history. Some roads that led you here were paved with blood, most often shed in vain. Up north, brave women and brave men fled the only worlds they knew in search of something better for their children. Toward the island, it was a different journey for the conquistadores who ravaged, built, and altered a land that they would lose after 400 years to a country that still cannot understand the splendor of our race, the anarchy of hearts that ache for sovereignty, a state that can't be found. Our people are all from somewhere else, but they are all from here. From the treacherous distances they traveled with the courage to build another legacy, unquestionably something has emerged, and that, my son, is hope. You are every slave who worked the fields and dreamt of being free, every Irishman and Pole who was spat on by immigrants who came before them and by each other, weathering unmerciful winters, breaking their backs, working the mines and farms. You are every newcomer who changed his name to assimilate, who disposed of his native language to assimilate, who was told that being an American is to assimilate, who by stripping his heritage and grieving it in silence, waited for the warmth of equal treatment. You are every Puerto Rican who left the sugarcane field for a mainland factory job, making lowly wages and awaiting equal treatment from fellow American citizens who refuse to see. You, hijo, or every tear of the Taíno whose land was ripped away by greed, disease, and hate. You are all of them, their truth and the distortions of their truth. the centuries, the continents, the ocean, seas, and rivers that flow into your being and reflect the rainbow that has spread into your eyes, where in chaotic harmony they celebrate at last, and in a multitude of languages they scream, I am the future of America. I am the future of America. Soy el futuro de América. I am the future of America. When you see me, you'll see yourself. Thank you. Thank you so much, Indiana State University. I have a guest for you who wants to say hi. And here he is.
Hi.
Say hi, Oski.
Hi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm touching his whole face. By the way, before we get to the Q&A, let me just say hi to Evelyn.
Hi.
That if you want to know more, have a more extensive conversation about all the products that we talked about, Oscar has a podcast, and the name of the podcast is Oscar Takes On. You Google that. You Google, hey, Oscar Takes On. And his episode is Puerto Rican Survival Kit. And you will have, I think it's a 16-minute conversation.
Yeah, it's like 16 to 15 minutes.
Of all the products. So yeah, go ahead and watch that and enjoy it. Are you showing the products? You got to show them up high. There you go. There you go. And he loves these products. He sometimes just puts witch hazel on his face. Just, why not?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Why
So thank you so much. And Jade, thank you for all your great help in making this happen. And can we have that in the chat? Oscar, put that in the chat, right?
Okay.
They can see you. Yeah, Oscar is a guest in the chat, so he's gonna include that. So let's have a little conversation here.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions for Javier that they would like to ask, either in the chat or over video?
They will. They get shy, but they will. I have former students here, so.
Oh, there it is. See you, Dr. E.
There's Oscar.
I'll start off with a question. So I am 100% Belgian, and we celebrate different holidays that my family celebrates. Is there any holidays or celebrations that your family continues to celebrate from your heritage in Puerto Rico in the U.S. so that Oscar can see them as?
For the longest time, we celebrated Three Kings. It is commonly known that, yes, Esperanza said it right, Esperanza de Jesus. Commonly known that Puerto Ricans have a very long Christmas. It starts early, and we keep going. We keep going with the Three Kings Day and then Las Octavitas. But Three Kings is an interesting thing because it's similar to Christmas, but instead of Santa Claus, you have the three wise men, los tres reyes magos, and you're supposed to leave grass for their camels. And so you leave some grass, and then they leave you a gift. And my grandmother always said, yo no regalo en Navidad. She doesn't give presents on Christmas. She didn't recognize Santa Claus. She only gives presents on Three Kings. But I think that was just her way of saving money. But yeah, so that's one that we sell. I mean, he knows now, he's 10, but we still give him a present, and especially presents from his grandmother, from his abu, because that's her tradition. And my mom always says, le mandaste regalitos acá, tienes que mandarle regalitos acá, send Oscar the gift. So yeah, and it's a beautiful tradition. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I guess I have a question.
Hi, Eve.
Jay knew I wouldn't be able to resist. Okay, my question is, what is the process of obtaining statehood, and what could just regular citizens do to push that effort?
Okay, this is an answer that would be too long. I don't exactly know what the process would be, and I'm not sure that Puerto Ricans in the majority want that. In the last referendum to talk about statehood, most people chose not to vote for even that. So the results are not really what the Puerto Rican people as a whole want. But if we come from a twice colonized island. And that means we are born with a colonized mindset, and we have to kind of liberate ourselves from our own mindset caused by being colonized by Spain and then colonized by the US and then being a Commonwealth, but still we feel that we're in the colonial states. I think that the US finds it highly convenient for us to be in the status that we're in right now, because for them, it's all about the money. And I'm not talking about the good people of the US, I'm talking about the special interests and the corporations and the people who really run the country. I'm not talking about the average American who may or may not know whether Puerto Rico is a part of the US. So I think it's not, ultimately, if the US wanted us to be a state, somehow we would be geared toward that somehow. But I think the one thing that I will say is that Puerto Ricans are highly resilient. And we could, if we had a different mindset, we could very much self-govern and be independent. Or we could also be a state that is autonomous and perhaps would keep the language intact, which is Spanish. So it's a complex issue. But thank you for asking, Eve. Thank you.
Are there any last questions that anyone would like to ask?
¿Cómo se te ocurrió montar esa presentación? Jenny is asking, I'm going to translate. Ask it, get the whole question and see.
Okay, I'll bring the whole question. There you go.
Okay. Okay, now let me see it again. Thank you, Jenny. Jenny was my student from way back when I was a very young professor. Some people still think I'm a young professor, but I've been teaching for 22 years, and probably Jenny was my student 20 years ago. But anyway, Jenny, and let's not, say our age. I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested in doing this until I started to see how people felt when they experienced racism, whether it's in the form of microaggressions or big moments of racism. Because if you've been following my career until I was in my early 30s, I wrote mostly about the human condition and man against the world and life and love and time and all that. But I didn't really write about identity. But when I moved to Pennsylvania, I suddenly, year after year, I realized that I became very, very Puerto Rican deprived. Like I became very Puerto Rican, very patriotic. And I realized that I wanted to do something about what it means to be Puerto Rican in the US, a Puerto Rican who moved. And I wanted to combine the things that I do well, which is I'm always a clown. I'm always making jokes. I teach. So I want it to be educational and funny. And I write poetry. So I wanted it to have that poetic element. And I said, well, this is a presentation that's a little hard to sell unless it becomes something theatrical. So we made it into a show. And everywhere we go, we have a stage where we have the abuela corner, and we have her little armchair, and we have all the products. And we have even more things. We have her picture. We have La Biblia de la Abuelita con el Rosario. And we have even el velón. I have it here because it helps me emotionally. El velón y las florecitas de abuela. So, and it's a big stage, and I go from one side to the other, and I fall on stage when I'm talking about the Vicks and all that, and how I fell, and abuela came to rescue me with the Vicks. So it's different, but we started in 2016 at a Penn State campus, and we didn't know how it would go. But it went very well. It went so well that in 2017, we did about 40 presentations. And altogether, we've done so many that we're kind of losing count. And we've reached thousands and thousands. We're talking about nearly 60,000 people all over the country. So, and I think what people like is that this is not a confrontational show that is telling you that you're bad, or it's not painting me as the victim. I think this is a show that is family friendly, where people can relate. It's sad, it's happy, it celebrates, it also points out what's wrong with the country. You can love your country and still criticize it. And I think people know that the ultimate message is one of unity. So I think that's why it happened. But thank you, Jenny, for that question. I hope I answered it thoroughly. One final question. Let's see. One final question.
Any other questions?
If no one steps up, I really, really will. So I'm just putting it out there. Okay, I'll broach my question. What's next for you? Okay, because I know we're going to bring you back. Okay, so that's a given. It's not going to be.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's not. It's a definite, and it won't be because of HH month. You know, so it'll be. So what's the next step for you that we can look forward to?
Well, I have a brand new show that it's already written and it has been performed already, but I'm performing it. For example, schools have liked Trouble so much that some schools, I've been there 3 times. And I remember a school that said, well, you've done Trouble 3 times here. Can you do something different? I'm like, I got it. And so I've been putting together the new show, and it's called The Perfect Latino. And it's a show that is similar to Trouble. It's the same format in that I tell jokes and I read poetry and I tell stories, but it's I think it's more lighthearted. In parts, it talks about a lot about the differences and the issues of being in a white-tino family and the cultural differences. And the whole Perfect Latino is a joke on one host about 2 years ago said, well, we like you because you're very relatable and friendly, and people won't get offended. You're the perfect Latino for our campus. And I thought, oh my God, you just gave me a title. Because, and it's also a take on some minorities. What they have to do in order to achieve equality is to be perfect. And unless they're perfect, they can't make it there. So it's kind of like a joke on that. So I'm enjoying that. Even though the show keeps changing, I keep writing, I keep teaching. And the pandemic, even though it's been terrible, it has also allowed me to spend more time with Oscar, who I was looking for you, yeah.
Right here.
Who, you know, with all the travel, the one thing that I think last year I traveled so much that sometimes I would be away for 3 days. I would come back one day and then be away for 3 days again. And, you know, boy misses his daddy. Come here again. Well, last year you were like down to here. And next year he'll be probably here. And then, yeah. I don't know what they're saying. Let me see the chat.
I'll see.
It's just me. I just posted a
Oh,
survey.
okay.
Okay, yeah, it's a survey.
Oh, okay.
It's just for ISU.
Everything was going well.
Yes. Thank you, Javier, for the great poems and this great show. Like Dr. E said, hopefully we will have you back and hopefully in person and not on Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of you, for your wonderful generosity. Of course, just in case, I think people know that there was a joke about the Little Honey Creek, but
It's great.
But it is great water. So thank you for that. Dr. E sent that all the way from Indiana. But thank you. Love and light to all of you. Stay healthy, stay strong, and hopefully I will see you in person soon. Thank you.
Oh my God.
It was great. Thank you. It was great.